Once on the verge of extinction, exterminated from its historic range,
restoring an animal that was once destroyed on purpose by our government, that's a real change in attitude.
When we started the recovery program, we thought we were going to lose the grizzly bears.
one of the greatest conservation stories in American history, is also one of the most controversial.
Yellowstone and its wildlife is part of our history as a country, and it's part of the hearts and minds of millions of people from all across the nation.
The interaction between the bears, the wolves, and the elk, it's the American Serengeti.
Everybody could agree that wolves in Yellowstone Park is a great deal and there's all positive stuff. But we knew that when we put wolves in Yellowstone that it wouldn't stop there.
As grizzlies and wolves surpass recovery goals and continue to expand, Wyoming faces the complex task of balancing the needs of these large predators with the needs of other wildlife and of people. We'll take a look at their history, their road to recovery, and how the Wyoming Game and Fish Department is managing them today.
The biggest challenge will be finding a way to address those competing interests for the same piece of land.
To those who live on the land and make a living on the land, I see no benefit to those species being here.
I don't think the American public is going to stand for treating them as vermin.
The political rhetoric is, oh, we want to kill every wolf we can and we want to wipe them out again, all that kind of stuff. That doesn't help.
This area is special. We certainly have an added responsibility to try to maintain this ecosystem.
If we see a bear, we whistle once, we yell bear, and then we quietly walk back into the building.
Don't lose your focus when you're in the backcountry. We have large predators like grizzly bears, and if you know what to do, you can generally avoid conflicts.
Grizzlies, to me, they're the epitome of what's wild and free. I don't see much noble about a wolf.
The wolf could very well be our demise.
The wolves are taking a hit for what a lot of the grizzly bears are doing.
When they talk about predator control, nobody talks about shooting grizzly bears. Everybody talks about killing wolves.
Maybe it's time for seeing where there might be some middle ground amongst everybody, as well as middle ground with the predators.
To see a wolf roaming once again in North America, not in a national park, it gives you hope for humanity that we may be able to pull this off.
Wolf issues are so emotional. People use wolves to demonstrate their values to other people. And a lot of the debate really has nothing to do with science. It has to do with human values.
Two powerful living symbols of the American wilderness are the grizzly bear and the wolf, and Wyoming is at the heart of a decades-long struggle to restore them to their native habitats. Now, with healthy populations of bears and wolves throughout the ecosystem, their future hinges on balancing the interests of predators, their prey, and the people who live among them.
I'm pretty proud of the program. I think we've done a really good job. We've got more wolves in more places than we ever thought, and we've had fewer problems.
You know, we've come a huge way. I mean, the bears are doing really well in the Yellowstone ecosystem. You know, a grizzly bear population that's increasing at 4 to 7% per year is pretty amazing.
But when you look at the size of where the landscapes that bears and wolves live in, Yellowstone's small, and our bear density and our wolf density is high.
And we're having grizzly bears seen in areas of the ecosystem where they had not been seen for 50 years, 75 or 100 years.
And I think despite a lot of debate, everybody agrees that Yellowstone is a different place.
Wyoming isn't only about grand vistas. It provides some of the best remaining wildlife habitat in the lower 48. But wolves were eradicated from Wyoming's wildlands and most of the rest of the country in the early 20th century, and by the end of the 1960s, Wyoming's grizzlies seemed on an unstoppable slide toward extinction.
Wolves and grizzly bears had a wide distribution in North America. Wolves throughout the entire North American continent, well into Mexico, with grizzly bears essentially occupying the western part of North America.
Bears have always been part of this portion of the country, one of the few places left where they weren't extirpated as man moved west and settled the west.
Wolves were extirpated from the state of Wyoming in the early part of the last century. That was because of conflicts, primarily conflicts with livestock.
The wolf was eradicated by the federal government. They're the ones that paid the bounties. They're the ones that paid the trappers to come in and remove the wolf so that the ranchers could run livestock, cattle, and sheep.
The wolf had vanished from most of the lower 48. Grizzlies were mostly confined to Yellowstone National Park. Next to Old Faithful, they became the park's greatest attraction. Tourists flocked to see them gathered on the park's garbage dumps and tempt them with handouts. The near tragic result was bears dangerously habituated to humans and dependent upon human food.
I remember on our 4th grade trip, we went into Yellowstone, our school trip. And I remember on the bus, my window was one of the few windows that fell down, and it went, put it down, and there was a grizzly bear on the side of the road. And he stood up on the side of the bus, and I was collecting sandwiches from all the kids, feeding this bear. Literally, he would take it right out of my hand, out the window. I didn't realize at the time, as a young 4th grader, that I'm contributing to one of the biggest problems that we've ever had in this Yellowstone ecosystem, and that is bears associating people with food.
Because once a grizzly bear gets a taste of human food, gets habituated to human food, it's likely to be a dead bear.
In 1959, twin brothers John and Frank Craighead began a pioneering field study of grizzly bears in Wyoming. The Craigheads refined the art of radio telemetry for tracking the movements of the bears. They filmed their behaviors and took biological samples and measurements. As their studies continued into the 1960s, the results made it clear that the grizzly's fate was a precarious one. In 1975, the bear was placed on the endangered species list.
Grizzly bear is particularly vulnerable because it's the lowest reproducing mammal in North America. So a grizzly bear in Yellowstone has a hard time replacing herself in her lifetime.
Because grizzly bears are so difficult to manage, because they reproduce very slowly, because there's lots of conflicts with people and people fear grizzly bears, they're a challenging species to recover.
We didn't know if it was going to work. We were developing this. Again, you look back at the 70s when this started, the charge was don't let any bears die.
We thought that there were perhaps as few as 30 adult females in the whole population, and that we were in a crisis that we couldn't stem the mortality.
We started thinking at that time, what are some steps we can take to reduce these mortalities? And we would talk to hunters, we talked to outfitters, and we talked to among ourselves, and what can we do to alleviate that?
People just shrugged their shoulders when I would go into offices and talk about grizzly bears. You know, it was like, well, that's not our responsibility, or, you know, we can't really do anything.
The success story was getting agencies to work together on reducing bear mortality, and then the public's buy-in.
The evolution of the public's understanding of the grizzly bear's vital role in the ecosystem helped accelerate its recovery, as we'll learn when Wyoming Predators, Prey, and People continues. Edging toward extinction in the 1970s, the grizzly bear was enjoying the benefits of a vigorous recovery program within a decade.
Putting in place a system to control mortality and building support in the people that live, work, and recreate in bear habitat has resulted in dramatic changes.
Ultimately, it was the people that were going to have to buy into it, and they did. And that's the real success story.
Wyoming took on, at least from the state perspective, many of the responsibilities to bring that species back from the brink of extinction to where we have it today.
Management-wise, we've done huge things for bears. I mean, there's over 1,200 miles of roads that are closed in important bear habitat. There's sanitation regulations, there's outreach and education.
If you camp clean, the bears don't have any interest in you because there's no food for them to come into.
We're getting away from those old camp robbing bears and more into a wild bear. But those old campsites that have been used for years and years and had dumps, you know, anybody knows anything about bears, they'll come back and check them for years on end.
And there are quite a few bear-human conflicts on the periphery of the system as the bears push further out onto private land. Wyoming has more of those than any other state because Wyoming has more habitat in the Yellowstone ecosystem.
Maybe the bittersweet fruit of grizzly bear recovery is that we have lots of bears in lots of places, but that also means lots of interaction with people. Most of those interactions end up just fine, bear going its way unharmed, the people going their way unharmed, but occasionally property is damaged and a bear needs to be moved or managed.
This is an example of a preventive management action in that we're catching a bear that we know is going to actually end up getting garbage because of where they're located. This gives us an opportunity to try to get ahead of the game when it comes to keeping bears out of trouble. While he's sedated, we're going to extract one of his premolars, which is evolving out of bears, so it's not a big problem to take that tooth. And we'll do a cross-section cut on this, and we'll be able to age this bear almost like you can age a tree by the rings. And then we'll take blood samples, we'll tag its ears and give it a lip tattoo as well. This bear now is on our history. If we do deal with this bear again, we'll immediately know whether it's been a problem bear or not, and so far it's not.
So we have a very active management program, and we encourage people to report conflicts. We'll respond, investigate them, do what we can to help them, clean up if it's an attractant-related problem, help them clean up the attractant and store it properly. We'll capture and move the bear if we need to. And if it's a bear that's unsuitable for whatever reason to be released back into the wild, we'll remove it from the population, which is a nice way of putting that we kill them. We euthanize them.
The Wyoming Game and Fish Department stays busy from spring through fall dealing with bears that come into conflict with people. These include both grizzly bears and, as in this case, black bears.
There was a sow, a female with a cub, that got on the Broadway in downtown Jackson, was able to dart her and the cub successfully and get her in a trap, and so that's who we're moving now. This road is it's an area we relocate a lot of black bears and grizzly bears. This bear is more apt to stay continuing to forage on its natural foods as opposed to getting in the garbage. This is a much better spot for her than where she was on Broadway Street. She's gonna have a much better chance of living longer and raising this cub successfully here as opposed to there. We want to reinforce their wariness of humans. So that's what the purpose of the gunshots are for. She's weary of our presence, which is what we want to reinforce with her so that she doesn't find it acceptable to raise cubs in downtown Jackson.
As existing grizzly bear populations recovered, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service introduced Canadian wolves into Wyoming and adjoining states in the mid-90s. It's been one of the most controversial wildlife stories ever. When Wyoming predators prey and people continues, we'll see that the success of the reintroduction has not ended the debate. Public support of recovery plans for the grizzly bear has increased over the years. Attitudes about the federal government's decision to reintroduce the wolf, on the other hand, continue to be mixed. This stems in part from the undisputable success of wolf recovery. The original minimum recovery goal for wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains was 300. Today there are over 1,500 wolves.
About 49% of the people that were surveyed that were Wyoming residents said they agreed with the reintroduction. Roughly 38 to 39% were opposed, so there were mixed feelings.
We did the reintroductions under congressional mandate in 95, 96, and everything has gone better than we'd ever hoped. We've got more wolves in more places and actually have had fewer problems than we predicted we would. The only reason we could even have wolf recovery is because the state fish and game agencies and sportsmen restored prey populations starting 50, 60 years ago.
All game species need to be managed. There's no question about that. You look back in history, way back at the turn of the century, we basically had no big game animals in the West. Through conscientious management of these species, we have more big game in the United States today than we've ever had.
One of the greatest success stories of the North American wildlife management model is the recovery of a lot of wildlife species. The addition of the recovery of grizzly bears and gray wolves is just another chapter.
All of the native carnivores that were here are here. They're also at probably the highest densities you'll find in North America.
Wyoming's vast wildlife habitats have become a laboratory. Along with the prey species, the return of all the natural predators to the ecosystem has created a unique opportunity for scientific research. That research will help the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and others ensure the continued viability of bears and wolves in the ecosystem.
What we're up here doing is we're watching a pack of wolves, and this is a study that we've done every winter since 1995.
We're trying to independently assess the kill rate, how often they're killing elk and other ungulates, as well as identifying whether they're cows or calves or bulls.
We're following Agate Creek pack. There's 12 of them, 6 adults and 6 pups. We actually have the oldest wolf in the park in our pack. He'll be 10 in a couple weeks.
We continuously watch wolves from the ground and from the air. We watch 3 packs intensively from the ground and all the packs from the air.
Researchers constantly monitor the progress of the wolf recovery program. This monitoring is carried out through observation and through capture and radio collar.
I think he's going to be a male pup. He's a male. 80% of all wildlife studies are less than 3 years. And we're in our 13th year here. And that's a very important statement to how complex the system is, how things change from year to year. It's key that we stay at it and follow these wolves.
Before studies like these, knowledge of the interactions among wolves, grizzlies, and their prey were as much speculation and myth as hard facts. Scientists now have the tools needed to separate fact from fiction and to open a new window into the intricate relationships among all the wildlife.
Well, what we completed this morning was an observation flight. We do these surveys to try to count as many females with cubs of the year as possible. We use the counts of females with cubs to come up with population estimates for the entire population, and then we come up with an allowable mortality allocation that we use to limit mortality in the system.
You know, it's really different for grizzly bears there now. There's a lot more bears than there were 25 years ago, and now there's wolves. And the interrelationship between bears and wolves is really a dynamic one.
Every kill wolves make in Pelican Valley from March, when the bears emerge from hibernation, to October, when they go back in, gets taken by a grizzly bear. That is phenomenal. It is not if, but when.
The best science in the world on bears exists in the Yellowstone system. We know more about the Yellowstone grizzly bears than we do about any other grizzly bear population.
When we started the study, we didn't think we'd be doing wolf-bear kind of research, and it's hard not to, because this stuff's happening right in front of you.
That intensive foundation of science is what we've built decisions on to get to the point of recovery and delisting. And the science will continue after recovery.
Scientific data ultimately have no meaning until they are interpreted. And the way the data is interpreted is helping determine the structure of grizzly and wolf management in Wyoming.
Grizzly bears are threatened by global warming and its effects on whitebark pine. And the seeds of whitebark pine are especially important for the grizzly bear's survival. Global warming is causing beetles to kill whitebark pine trees at an unprecedented rate, at an alarming rate.
Listing the grizzly bear under ESA doesn't prevent mountain pine beetle from killing whitebark pine. You know, one thing we're sure of, whether it's mountain pine beetle or global warming or fire, is that any natural system is a dynamic system. It's always changing over time. And what we've put in place is a whole series of indices to monitor all the things that we think could change and how those changes could affect the important issues related to bears like reproduction and survival.
As these species are removed from the endangered species list, they transition from federal to state management. For both grizzlies and wolves, this is one of the main sources of controversy.
The thing that's very difficult is to go from looking at wolves being protected as an endangered species. It's difficult for a public that's very enamored of wolves to go from that to a state management program that says we will include wolves in our program, how we manage other game.
I don't think we'll ever get complete buy-off that wolves were brought back to Wyoming, but I think the majority of people accept the fact and expect them to be managed as a state wildlife resource, just as the other wildlife resources in the state are currently managed.
Because of the way the federal government has approached reintroduction, we've been unable to really get a clear channel of management, and it is our hope that with delisting, the state will be able to manage them simply because the state can manage them better on the ground, and it's a challenge that I think we can meet.
The State Fish and Game Agency has like 300 employees that are researchers, educators, outreach specialists, managers. They can do 100 times better job than we could do for wolves. And so the future of wolf conservation and of minimizing the conflicts with people really lies in the hands of the state fish and game agencies.
As wolf and bear numbers climb, the focus shifts to their impacts on other wildlife, livestock, and people when Wyoming Predators, Prey, and People resumes. As growing populations of grizzlies and wolves naturally expand their ranges, it is inevitable that they will have an impact on other wildlife species and livestock. Since they were reintroduced to the northern Rocky Mountains, wolves have killed thousands of sheep and cattle in the region. Grizzly bears kill several dozen livestock every year in Wyoming alone. This causes significant financial losses for individual ranchers and has raised questions about how to strike a balance between recovered populations of these predators and too many bears and wolves.
It is a tricky balance to try to manage the population so that we take into consideration the needs of the animals, the bears and the wolves, in addition to the needs of the other people that utilize the natural resources.
We knew that when we put wolves in Yellowstone that it wouldn't stop there, that pretty soon we'd have wolves in ranch country.
The wolf is always going to be a contentious issue because of its ability to reproduce. When it has a good food source, it can reproduce like a dog. It can litter up.
Certainly the ranching community is not going to be out just trying to destroy wolves or grizzly bears or any other species. It's all about protecting our property rights, and we need to be able to take those actions that are necessary in order to protect our livestock.
So far, we've killed about 550 wolves since 1987 for depredations on livestock, and we knew that would be part of the cost of wolf restoration, with some livestock losses and some lethal wolf control.
To their own disservice, wolves have been reintroduced back into an ecosystem that is not the same as it was 200 or 300 years ago.
And the issue is no longer should we or shouldn't we have wolves in Wyoming. It's how do we create a management scenario that allows us to coexist with the presence of wolves.
Wolves will predate livestock. They are going to do it. They are the slowest prey base out there that is of the right size to get the calories they need to live.
We've just seen a progression in increasing losses of livestock in those areas, from a more typical summer season loss of 1.5% to 2%, climbed to 3 or 4% with the grizzly bears, and now as high as 7% with the onslaught of the wolves.
All of our riders spend a lot of their time now simply hunting for calf carcasses, yearling carcasses, looking for kills. In the past, they spent more time doctoring cattle, sick cattle. They spent more time moving cattle around to different areas. They had more time to manage the grass on the allotment, and now the bulk of their time is spent managing for predators, and possibly the management even outstrips the direct loss.
I think a lot of people don't realize that the major economic impact from wolves doesn't come from the cattle that they kill. It comes from the pounds they prevent or run off of the cattle during their major weight gaining season in summer pasture.
We're in a very marginal business in the livestock industry, and to see your losses triple, it is a substantial loss.
The concerns of ranchers are not trivial. Their stewardship of land is critical because those lands are essential to the survival of all wildlife. Ranch land in Wyoming constitutes some of the most important wildlife habitat anywhere. But today, much of that land is threatened by development.
We are the biggest providers of habitat to Wyoming's wildlife, especially in the winter and the critical time for the animals.
In a landscape that's becoming increasingly popular, where people are moving in hordes and droves into this place because they want a little taste of paradise, that's the concern, that you've got to make sure that the habitat protections are in place.
Subdivision and development on private land is likely to have the biggest impact over time. That's going to affect the movement of wildlife. It's going to affect bears, wolves, water quality, you name it.
People are taking prime areas for trophy homes or subdivisions without regard to wildlife corridors or preserving winter range. And without winter range, the whole system starts to come apart.
The fates of grizzlies, wolves, and other wildlife are intimately intertwined. The loss of winter range is more stressful on the wildlife species than any predator can be. When wildlife has lost its historic winter range, people sometimes must step in to help a species thrive.
We've been feeding the elk here for the game and fish because there isn't no place for them to go down country. And if they don't take care of them, they'd starve to death. When we got here today, we didn't know where our elk was at, but we seen some wolves. Now the elk are coming down now, and they're glad that we're here to knock the wolves out of here for them so they can come and eat. They'll have a little rest here for a little bit now until this evening, and then they'll come and strike again. I like the wolf. I just wish that we could kind of paddle him a little bit and make him respect us a little bit, just like any other animal.
One of the most contentious issues swirling around wolf and grizzly recovery is the question of what effect they're having on Wyoming's big game populations, for better or worse. While researchers try to understand the complex relationship between predators and their prey, opinions on the subject are extremely diverse.
The wolves are wreaking havoc with our game herds. Our cow-calf ratios are way down. The elk have been displaced into areas that they historically have not used.
The wolf is depredating the wildlife, ungulate wildlife population in drastic numbers.
The elk and the wolves have been doing this dance for, eons, and they got refreshed. And I think because of that, they're going to be a healthier herd.
The elk have declined 50% in the northern herd since wolf reintroduction, and many people feel that's attributable to wolves. We think it's more complex than that. Many things in nature are multi-causal, and we think wolves are one part of that decline.
We know the biggest predator on elk calves, for instance, is bears, and nobody's surprised by that that's studied wildlife. But when they talk about predator control, nobody talks about shooting grizzly bears. Everybody talks about killing wolves.
The wolves are taking a hit for what a lot of the grizzly bears are doing. But it's the long and short of it is it's one more predator in here that is not being managed. The only predator in the Yellowstone ecosystem that is being managed is man.
There will be in the future bountiful populations of big game for the outfitters to make a good living off of, and for hunters to come into this ecosystem and have world-class hunting. Maybe the difference, and I think a beneficial one, will be those game populations, I feel, have a better chance of being healthy game populations.
60% of the outfitters in northwestern Wyoming are now for sale because of the wolf.
It's collateral damage to having the wolves in here, so people are going to say, well, we can sacrifice that. Well, it's easy to say you can sacrifice that when you're sitting back east, behind your desk in your great job, but you see a person put out of work because of something like this, it's pretty hard back home.
For outfitters willing and able to expand their operations beyond hunting, wolves and grizzlies can represent a new source of income. A growing segment of the public is eager to see and learn about these predators in their natural habitats.
It would not be an exaggeration at all to say that the wolves have changed my life. The wolf is so charismatic that people wanted to see wolf films, whereas before wolves came in, there were actually very few films made about Yellowstone wildlife. It was a rarity to see a true natural history film.
To be able to just go into Yellowstone and have about a 98% chance of seeing wolves is pretty spectacular for an artist. And I think that's untrue in any other part of wolf habitat in Alaska or Canada, so that's pretty special.
And things have changed a lot recently, and grizzly bears have really come back in recent years, and with the introduction of the wolves, it's been very exciting to me to see the changes in this land, and it's been a great opportunity to get out and film it.
There is a market for people who want to see these big predators on the land, and they will pay for the privilege.
We're really pleased to see bears and wolves back here and consider it one of the best things that's happened to our business, because so many people want to come and see bears and wolves in the field.
The whole experience of being able to see America's Serengeti here in the U.S. rather than traveling overseas really appeals to a lot of people.
By far the most popular attractions to this region for many of our visitors, wolves and grizzlies. They're the charismatic megafauna that bring people to this region. And people from all over the world coming to the greater Yellowstone region come through Cody, Wyoming and the Buffalo Bill Historical Center, and many of them especially now toward the Draper Museum of Natural History.
For us as a business, having 350 to 400 guests that we wouldn't have at all in the months of late April and early May, which is our quiet off season, is very significant.
When the bears start coming up on the moth fields, in late July, early August, we do trips where we'll set up on a vantage point, a long ways away, and use spotting scopes and observe the bears. And I have people that request that trip every year.
So what we have out here is a sow grizzly with 3 cubs, and they're the classic grizzly bear. They're really easy to identify, and it looks like they're grazing more than they're eating anything else. It looks like that they're eating the grasses.
I got all 4 together.
How perfect was that?
Oh yeah.
It was incredible to see them that close and the babies playing with their mother. That was really cool.
Yeah.
That was neat, wasn't it? Seeing all those bears up close.
Tourism alone brings about $30 million into Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming by increased publicity and increased visitation because of the wolf issue.
We're not getting the people to come look at the wolves as the federal government says they are. They're not. The numbers aren't there.
There's a lot of publicity about how much more all the money that's bringing in, but if you actually look at the number of tourists coming into this part of the country, it really hasn't changed that much.
The reality is that bears and wolves are expanding into areas occupied by people, but humans are also expanding into the animals' habitats. When Wyoming predators prey and people continues, some ways that the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and others are trying to minimize predator conflicts. When people share the land with wolves and grizzlies, conflicts are inevitable, sometimes with tragic consequences for both. These conflicts can be greatly reduced through some simple measures.
We have the Wyoming Game and Fish Department's Bear Management Program that responds to human bear conflicts, works proactively to prevent conflicts, works very diligently educating the public.
There are many effective measures that people can take to keep grizzly bears out of trouble in people's backyards.
One of the big things we've been active in is garbage. That's been a big issue.
60% of our conflicts are garbage, so that's going to wipe out a significant amount of bear conflicts.
The Wyoming Game and Fish Department began a program called the Bear-Wise Community Program to proactively address human-bear conflicts. And with that program, we make bear-resistant products like this garbage cart, and it's automatically latched when it's shut. We saw this rise in human-bear conflicts as a safety issue, and we also wanted to stop these preventable bear mortalities. All the bears that we removed due to becoming food conditioned and getting into these conflicts are preventable deaths.
This isn't Florida, a golf course community in Florida that people are moving into. They're moving into, and in some cases living right next to some of the wildest remote country in the lower 48 states. Doing so comes with a responsibility.
Choosing to live in wolf and bear country makes it necessary to consider how to avoid conflicts and confrontations. In a rural state like Wyoming, this can even create a challenge for kids at school.
Bears frequent this area. They move up and down the river. A couple of the parents of the students here asked that we work with them to build a fence around the playground.
So far I have not seen bears around here, but I'm told daily that tracks are down by the river, and just to be aware.
We all came together on a weekend, Game and Fish Department people, the teachers, the students, and their families, and we built the fence around the school.
If we see a bear, we whistle once, we yell bear, and then we quietly walk back into the building. And we practice this about once every 3 weeks just to keep alert on what to do and what to watch for.
The most effective preventative measure is knowledge. An understanding of predator behavior and the right way to react in an encounter can save lives, both human and animal.
Now, if we see a bear from a distance, okay, the best thing to do is to back away. Just back away slowly. Now, before you ever get into this situation, you should already have thought about, what am I going to do if a bear charges me? As the bear's coming, it's going to run into this cloud of the pepper spray. I want you to aim for my knees, because the bear's going to come in, if he does, with his head down, and he's going to be running, and it'll get in his face that way. But if you shoot over the top of it, it's not going to get in his face. If the bear starts to turn and run away, good. You don't need to spray anymore.
The evolving acceptance for the role of wolves and grizzlies reaches into the remote parts of their ranges. Here, people who want to use the backcountry are finding new technologies to aid in peaceful coexistence with predators.
We have, over the last couple of years, gone to using an electric fence, and that has been extremely successful.
The electric fence around the cook tent, dining hall tent, has really never been messed with. You leave camp alone for a couple days, come back, and it's still standing. Putting feed up in the cache. I mean, it's not that the bears aren't here, it's just that taking those steps seem to deter them enough from getting into things. We've always got to deal with, when the elk go down, then you have to go in and try to recover, the elk, and if the bear gets it, there's not much you can do. We'll get their hide, we'll get their head out, but if it's that bear's animal, it's that bear's animal.
It's clear that the wolf and the grizzly are here to stay in Wyoming, and the signs are overwhelmingly positive that with proper management, they'll continue to fulfill a vital role in the ecosystem. We'll look at reasons for hope when Wyoming, Predators, Prey, and People concludes. The controversy and political rhetoric surrounding wolves and bears in Wyoming won't soon die, and delisting from the Endangered Species Act has only fueled the fires. Wyoming has a long history of successful wildlife management and today enjoys some of the most impressive wildlife resources in the world. Proper management of these predators will help change public attitudes.
Wolves are part of the natural heritage of Wyoming, and there are places they should be in Wyoming, and there's places they shouldn't be. But just like any animal, you're going to need to manage them.
From a bear's point of view, the bears are going to see very little difference between listed and delisted status.
If people would give it a little more thought and see if they can have a little more flexibility and understanding what it takes for both humans and large predators to coexist, maybe it's time for some of those types of discussions and seeing where there might be some middle ground amongst everybody, and as well as middle ground with the predators.
It comes down to management. If we can get the correct management regime in place and the resources to support that management, then I think it's possible we will be able to continue grazing livestock.
It's going to take the community coming together, the outfitters, the oilmen, the subdividers, and the conservationists to work a plan that's good for everybody.
The same people that want to see wolves running around out here, I'm sure would still like to see elk, deer, bighorn sheep.
Mountain lions are hunted, black bears are hunted, and other species have been hunted, and that's certainly part of the model of North American wildlife management.
The complete success of the program is when they're issuing hunting tags for wolves and you've got a healthy population with a surplus that people can participate in and help harvest. That's complete success.
Hunting grizzly bears is the goal of all conservationists, as long as the population is truly and fully recovered.
Hunting will never be a threat to grizzly bears in the Yellowstone system. You know, there may be some level of sport hunting, but it's going to be minor.
I think hunting will make wolves a little bit more wild, a little bit more fearful of people, and will help solve some of the conflicts we now see.
The best steward of this ground is the person that's out there that's trying to make a living off of it.
If these species are of national importance, then that should register in dollars and cents and come back to the states.
We've got to start working together, put our old biases and baggage aside, and start moving in the same direction, which is keeping this landscape intact.
The state of Wyoming, the Wyoming Game Fish Commission, and the Wyoming Game Fish Department is committed to managing grizzly bears and gray wolves into perpetuity to assure there's never a need to consider them for relisting.
60 years ago, U.S. ecologist and environmentalist Aldo Leopold said that only a mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of a wolf. But as the wolf and the grizzly regain their place in Wyoming's ecosystem, the residents of the state are listening objectively too. And that will sustain the kind of enlightened wildlife management needed to create an enduring future for the predators, prey, and people of Wyoming.